near 80 registrants for tonight, but we're going to get ourselves started here. You have come tonight for us to talk about trauma-informed work, and we have a huge lineup of folks tonight. We're going to have to be really focused and intentional around realizing that each of these folks that are presenting to us are giving us just the narrowest of window into their exemplary work. So I'm certain before the night is over, you're going to want everybody's contact information and you're going to want to follow up. And we hope that we can build this into an even more robust topic. As we get started, my name is Cody Nielsen. I am executive director of an organization called Convergence Strategies, which focuses on religious, secular, and spiritual equity-based concerns at the intersections of anti-racism and decolonialism work. I, alongside that consulting work as the director of the Center for Spirituality and Social Justice at Dickinson College, which is in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Dickinson College and Central PA is home of the Susquehannock Nation of indigenous and native communities who were forcibly removed from those communities as far back as the mid 18th century and perhaps even before then. As well, Dickinson College is home of what was known as the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, the first reprogramming school in the United States that was directly built to reprogram Native and Indigenous identities. And because of that history, Dickinson College, along with so many of us, have work to do to recognize the importance in the work of overcoming systemic colonialism and racial structures that are embedded within our educational systems. I'm really excited to emcee this event tonight, to be as brief as possible, to be a sort of midwife along the way to keep us going. We have, as I said, a good lineup of folks that are going to be very brief as we go, an opening speaker and some keynotes, and then a book talk, another speaker, and actually 3 more speakers after that. And then we'll have some Q&A. That Q&A is going to come right about the halfway mark, about 7:45, and then we're going to have a workshop in the 30-minute window at the end. So again, it's going to be very short and quick. You're going to be wanting to be ready to take judicious notes, as well as be ready to take down contact information so you can connect with these folks. We are going to start tonight with our opening speaker, Janeen Bryant. And I apologize, Janeen, do we need to put a doctor behind that name at all or anything? Titles are important and sometimes we forget those titles. I think that's important. Janeen is the founding member of the Empathetic Museum. You're going to be talking about embracing empathy, equity, and trauma in artificial intelligence. And since you only have a few minutes, I'm going to turn it right over to you and just cue me in when you're done.
Fantastic. Not quite doctor yet, so we're on that path. I'm joined by Jenna Marshall today, who will be sharing my slides. I'm going to start because I only have a few minutes. Please close your eyes as I read this passage from Resmaa Menakem. Think back to an interaction in which you experienced a lack of regard from someone else. In your mind's eye, relive that interaction from beginning to end, then replay it. Pay close attention to your body. What sensations did you experience when you first recognized the other person's lack of regard? Where, when, and how does it experience pain or discomfort? Where, when, and how does it feel good? Constrict, move, or activate? So I'm asking those questions because empathy and trauma are inherent in our bodies. And so when we ask the question around how does artificial intelligence intersect with our human ability to connect emotionally, it has to do with our bodies. And so as we go through this particular presentation, although I only have a very short amount of time with you, I want us to begin to think about our bodies and the intersection of trauma and how our workplace and our bodies are going to be inherent into this conversation and the future of our conversations around trauma in the workplace. Next. So empathy and our ability to understand, this definition that we're going to be used as one of our operationalized definitions was actually generated by artificial intelligence. So you see in the corner there, that icon is a GPT icon, which is one of the many chatbots that is an artificial intelligence chatbot. It's one of the first that many people are introduced to when they are interacting with artificial intelligence. And I wanted to use it today to start our conversation. The Empathetic Museum has been around for many, many years, and I'm Janeen Bryant, one of the founding members of a consortium of practitioners who use empathy as a guiding principle. And so we asked this chatbot to define empathy for us as we were going forward in the conversation for artificial intelligence and empathy in the workplace. And we wanted to underline and underscore the idea that empathy can be defined by artificial intelligence because it's harvesting the ideas that many of us have used for so many years around how do we respond with compassion and understanding, and allowing us to connect with each other, and allow us to use support and care for each other with our bodies and our feelings and our emotions. The image that's beside it is actually created by a Microsoft artificial intelligence tool that created, it's a designer AI tool that when we asked it to design for us what a definition of empathy would look like, this is what it gave us as well. As you can see, the image is about relationality. So why do we want to talk about empathy right now? Why is this so important? Well, this is so important because we're actually in a very critical moment. Emotional AI and emotional artificial intelligence technologies are more pervasive than ever. And if left unchallenged and unchecked, if we just think that it's going to automatically evolve, that empathy is going to come about as a part of artificial intelligence, we are fooling ourselves, because AI will actually strengthen and replicate inherent bias that is already occurring in our systems. It is up to us as institutions and organizations to check these biases at the forefront. And if we don't make it an ethical and moral imperative to begin to put boundaries and to put questions and to put checks in place, we actually, as be creating and amplifying the problem. So let's continue on. I want to show you some examples of how this shows up in our work right now. This first image is one that many of us may think we know. If you look at that first image on the left, you may think you know who that is. It's a pixelated, highly pixelated image, but it's one we probably are familiar with. And so even though it's a very pixelated image, you probably know who it is, but when you ask AI to fill in the gaps, it creates the image on the right. That first image is a very low resolution image of the first Black president, Barack Obama. But AI, when presented with that image, guesses it to be a white man as the output. Let's try another one. This young woman, in just July of 2023, July 14th to be exact, asked an AI tool called Playground AI to create a highly professional image from her original picture there on the left. What it spit back to her was the image on the right. So again, it replicates gender and race bias by creating enlarged eyes. It changed her eye shape, her eye color, and her skin color, and even a bit of her hair color. So the framing that the AI tools use can replicate certain biases that are inherent in algorithms, because these tools aren't necessarily going to learn or have emotional depth. There are some pitfalls inherent. Let's examine some. They don't have context. They don't think about psychological safety. These bias patterns are inherent in the algorithms. So whatever limited representations or the limitations of the diverse data sets or patterns that are inherent when we start with the AI patterns are going to be there when they are built. And the tools are only going to be as strong as we make them. So we should have concerns and we should express the concerns. And as institutions and organizations, we need to have accountability. We actually have to have these questions and be bold enough to state them. So where does empathy come into this conversation? Well, the Empathetic Museum has been having some of these conversations from the beginning, because empathy actually helps us build some of these connections inherently. And as Brene Brown has been asking for a long time, how do we create some of these accountabilities and connections and relationships from the start of our conversation? The Empathetic Museum has been using what has been known as an organizational maturity model and an organizational rubric for quite a while. You can find more information about this at the empatheticmuseum.com. But I want to show you the maturity model very quickly. There are 5 characteristics that you might notice about these. Many of you are familiar with this tool. Some of the characteristics include civic vision, institutional body language, community resonance, timeliness and sustainability, and performance measures. Each one of these characteristics goes along a matrix that moves from regressive to proactive. This is common for a maturity rubric, and takes you along around different measurements that we have aligned characteristics that any organization can take themselves along to self-identify or even ask community stakeholders to identify. You can also use this against artificial intelligence. We are particularly interested in community resonance and institutional body language for artificial intelligence. Let me show you 2 examples very quickly, because you should be asking yourself, is your organization using AI technology in ways that are compatible? Like this AI ethics workflow, you can start by thinking about and moving through your own ethical questions. Like this very clear example where an AI museum planning toolkit can move you through very critical questions. Your training and development module, are you applying it right? And are you evaluating? Or like this example from Australia, from Maya Cares, this is a collaboratively developed tool that they built with community stakeholders that looks at a chatbot that addresses some racism and gives resources to community members to address real-time racism. So here's a great example that you can use in real time. And last, I want to share with you some additional resources. I encourage you to screenshot this or use your phone to just simply snap these pictures so that you can have some of these resources available ongoing. I want to thank you for your time today. And I appreciate you examining some of these ways in which empathy, equity, and trauma in the workplace can start to be mitigated if we are asking ourselves the bold questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Janeen, and also Jenna, for being in the background, but doing important work there and helping as part of this presentation. Again, make sure you're taking good solid notes here as we go through that process, because there's going to be lots of folks that you're going to want to chat with as we go. Okay, we are going to continue right on. Dr. Danielle Roberts, President and CEO of the Injury Support Network for Servicewomen, is going to be talking about viewing moral injury through the lens of empathy, equity, and diversity. Danielle, we're going to turn it right over to you for the next few minutes here as you go.
Okay. Hey, thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening. I understand somebody might be in Australia, so it might be good morning. Good, whatever. Good to see you. Thanks for dropping in. As you mentioned, I'm the president and CEO of Moral Injury Support Network for Servicewomen Incorporated. And I want to share with you briefly, first of all, moral injury, you may not be familiar with that term or that concept, but moral injury is a betrayal of what is right by someone who holds legitimate, well, let me say it this way, okay, moral injury has multiple definitions. There's not an agreed to definition. It's something that we've been researching for about the last 20 years or so, but it's a very new concept to a lot of people, closely related to PTSD, but it's not PTSD. So some researchers have conceptualized moral injury as perpetrating, failing to prevent, bearing witness to, or learning about acts that transgress deeply held moral belief and expectations. Others have looked at it as a betrayal of what's right by someone who holds legitimate authority, like, for example, a military leader in a high-stakes situation. But the way I like to think about moral injury is when you couple trauma with the betrayal or trauma that violates somebody's deeply held moral beliefs, then you have moral injury. Potentially you have moral injury. So moral injury was originally a term that was conceptualized by Dr. Nash, and Dr. Shea, and he developed that term based on working with veterans returning from Vietnam and the various very difficult things they encountered there. Here at Moral Injury Support Network for Servicewomen, or Missions for short, we have expanded that definition, and one, we focus on moral injury in servicewomen, women veterans, and military spouses. But two, we understand that moral injury can happen not just as a result of combat or military exposure. It can happen as a result of racism, sexual assault, sexual harassment, gender harassment. It can be the result of a whole lot of different things that anyone can face in society. It's tend to thought of as a veteran term, but it's far from that. It's an ancient problem that is a relatively new research term. So as long as people have been on the earth, we've been violating each other in ways that are very harmful. So that's moral injury. Now, in terms of empathy, when we're thinking or talking with someone about moral injury type of situations, empathy is really key, because guilt and shame are huge major parts of moral injury, results of moral injury. And so empathy, and one part of empathy is not being judgmental. And so, for example, I, as a white male, I've never experienced racism in any significant way that I can really remember. So I don't have that context, personal experience, right? But I, as a chaplain, I have counseled people who have experienced racism. And so in my mind, I don't think of, well, I'm not sure if this is real, I'm not judging, whatever. That person who says they are morally injured as a result of racism, who, for instance, was a Black female, I assume that everything she says is true, and that it's meaningful to her, and that it's very painful to her. And it's not, and I try to do my best to understand everything she's experiencing, regardless of whether I've experienced it for myself or have actual knowledge for firsthand about that sort of thing. I know it happens, and to her it's very real. So there's no like judging or determining the validity of anyone's experience, but empathy is about you know, from my point as a chaplain, you say you experienced it, then I believe you. How can we help you? From an equity standpoint, we need to understand that because moral injury, because we have different populations, women, we have different racial and ethnic population, each of those people can experience moral injury in a different way because of the various social pressures, institutions, and other factors that go into a person's life. We need to make sure that our research into moral injury is not just that we're looking at moral injury based on gender, on race, on backgrounds, that we don't just do research from the standpoint of get all the people we can and ask them, you know, or what tends to happen a lot of times in research, we end up with a lot of men and a few women, and we just say, well, since we had men and women, this must apply to everybody. And equity in research means that we understand there are different groups, different populations, and their context and experience are different. So when we do research, we need to make sure that we're capturing each group's experience as best we can, so that our our results are equitable and appropriate for various populations. Finally, when we think about diversity, we have to recognize again that moral injury is not just something that happens to veterans. It's not just something that happens to men or women, straight people, or even the religious, right? You can be an atheist and still be morally injured, because if you're an atheist, you most likely still have a sense of what is right in the world, how you should be treated, how others should be treated, what's right and what's wrong. So diversity is simply about recognizing there's a whole lot of different experiences, and that we shouldn't objectify people or their experience. We have to realize that moral injury is very personal and it's very subjective. What I might consider moral injury to you may not be. It may be a moral conflict, but maybe not a moral injury. It may be a moral wrong, but not necessarily a moral injury. And I'll give you an example of that. So one woman, a woman veteran, when we were conducting research with women veterans, asking about their moral injury experiences, one woman said, yeah, I served in Vietnam and I was raped, but I wouldn't consider that a moral injury. And I said, why not? And she said, because back then, this was the 70s. You know, the Army was a good old boys club. What did I expect was going to happen? Like, I knew it was morally wrong, but I wouldn't consider myself to be moral injury. So to me, that sort of blew me away, right? But it was a recognition that moral injury is a personal thing. It's for each person to decide whether or not they're morally injured. Now, there's lots and lots of stuff I could go on about moral injury. My organization has written 3 books about moral injury. And so we do a conference every year about moral injury. And so there's a whole lot to moral injury. But just so that probably everybody else has slides, and I didn't make any slides, I'm going to give you a slide. Can you read that? Oh, it's backwards. That's my, let's see. No, that won't work. It's the website, misns.org. That's our website. I'm going to put it in the chat so you can see it. And my email is in there also. So you can also Google Moral Injury Support Network, and we will come up on top, guaranteed. But it's misns.org, and Susan, who is the public relations person for the organization, and she's on the meeting tonight. She's cringing because I'm doing a poor job of putting our organization out there. But you can find us. You can reach out to me. We have tons of resources on that website about moral injury. If you subscribe to the website, we'll send you for free our latest book on moral injury research, discussions, and interventions support methods. So I'll look forward to getting your questions or hearing those questions later. Thanks for having me on the program.
All right, thank you, Daniel, for this. We're going to move right ahead. We still have 4 folks we're going to try to get to before the Q&A. So do just sort of be packaging and preparing for that Q&A time. Our next speaker is Dr. Catherine Manning, president of Blackbird, DC. She's going to be talking about her book briefly, The Empathetic Workplace, 5 Steps to a Compassionate, Calm, and Confident Response to Trauma on the Job. Catherine, I see you in there. So I'm just going to turn it right over. There you are right there. I'm turning it right over to you. And if you can give us just a few minutes and we'll move us through.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hello, everybody from Washington, D.C. It's a pleasure to be here talking with you. I am a lawyer, and for most of my career, I've worked with crime victims. I started off doing hotline work, domestic violence, rape crisis work. After law school, I ended up at the U.S. Department of Justice, where I was a senior attorney advisor on victims' rights and guided the department through its response to victims in cases ranging from terrorism to fraud to child exploitation and more. A few things became clear to me. One was that people didn't need different things based on what they were a victim of. Everybody needed to feel heard and acknowledged for their victimization. Everybody needed a voice. They wanted to have a sense of autonomy. Everybody needed a little support to get back on their feet and heal from what they were going through. And then the next thing I realized was it wasn't just the victims in our cases who needed those things. It was my colleagues as well. Sometimes because of issues they were facing at work, dealing with difficult cases or challenging issues at work, harassment, bias, abusive bosses, people needed some help. Sometimes it was issues outside of work, intimate partner violence, people dealing with mental or physical illness, caring for loved ones. I began to realize that trauma was not limited to the criminal justice system, but really was all around us. In 2018, when Me Too happened, that was kind of what pushed me out of the Justice Department, because what I saw in Me Too, I was on the one hand thrilled that people were talking about these issues that had been so central to my work for so many years, but also I was very frustrated by Me Too because I felt like it put so much on survivors. Ask them to share their story. Everybody needs to hear your story, but without an understanding that when somebody shares a story of trauma with you, you have an obligation to listen and provide support in a compassionate way, and that's not at odds with conducting a full and fair investigation, which I knew very well from my work at the Justice Department. So when you get angry about something, that's often a sign that you need to do something. So I started working on my book then. Which was really aimed at teaching people how do you respond to a story of trauma at work in a compassionate and supportive way. Now, in the way of publishing, it took a couple years for the book to come out. So the book came out in February of 21. And in the meantime, between when I started and when it was published is when we had COVID and racial unrest and political violence. And we've seen here in the US repeated gun violence again and again. We're now seeing war in Ukraine that is affecting so many around the globe. All of these issues have just made clear that trauma really is all around us. I sometimes say trauma is the air we're breathing here in the 2020s. Seems like it started in early 2020 and it's just continued since then. So what my work aims to do is teach people how to respond better to trauma at work in a way that supports the individual, builds bonds between co-workers and colleagues, and also ultimately creates healthier and more productive workplaces. The aim is not to teach everybody to be a therapist. You shouldn't be the therapist for your colleagues. It's just to give you what I think of as the first aid skills. You're the one on the scene, you provide some immediate support, and you refer them on to the experts. Through my book, what I teach is what I call the LASER technique, LASER. So those are the 5 steps to a compassionate response to trauma on the job. Step 1 is listen. So this is all about active listening, understanding that part of listening is creating the circumstances where somebody feels comfortable opening up. Second step is acknowledge. This is the step people often miss. You maybe do a great job listening as somebody is sharing their story, but then when they finish, you want to jump right to solutions, to telling them where to go next. Before you say anything, you need to let the person know that you heard them. You have to acknowledge that they've shared something. Acknowledgement is just thank you for letting me know. Just letting them know that you heard them. I'm sorry for everything you're going through. That sounds awful. Just a quick acknowledgement that shows that you heard what they've shared. Next step is share information. In my experience with crime victims, everybody craved information. When your world is turned upside down, you want more information to help you make sense of it. So in the workplace, this might be information about, for instance, where do you file a complaint about bias or harassment? It could be sharing information about your organization's values. We take employee safety very seriously. So share information. The next step is empower. That's where you give the person resources that they are looking for to help them heal from the impact of what they're going through. This might be mental health resources. It could be flexible work resources, for instance. You want to, let me stress, you want to make sure it's the resources that they actually are seeking. So a great place to start is, how can I help you? And then the final step is R for return. And this is both literally returning to the person, checking in with them, letting them know that you continue to be a resource for them, but also crucially, it's a return to ourselves. Supporting others in trauma can take a toll on us. So it's important that as we do that, we are also taking steps to protect our own mental health. So again, those 5 steps are listen, acknowledge, share, empower, and return. I like to say it's to help you stay laser focused on the person in front of you and what it is that they need. Here's a copy of the book. It's called The Empathetic Workplace. It's available on Amazon and all over. I will also drop my contact information in the chat and am available for questions. Thank you.
Well, I can't have to access
All
it.
right, thank you. Appreciate that, Catherine. And again, be taking notes to ask folks and also be ready to be taking down contacts for everyone. Moving along, we have Vitor Fonseca, who is joining us from, I am trying to get the right university down, but I am not going to get it right. So I will let him do that for us. Vitor is a member of the section of Archives and Human Rights on the International Council of Archives. Your topic that he's going to be talking about trauma in archives as an ethical issue. Vitor, the stage is yours for the next few minutes. Please take it away.
Thanks. I want to give your my thanks for the invitation, and good evening and good morning to everybody. I want to explain that I'm not an expert in trauma within archives, and also that English is not my native speaking language. So maybe I will do a lot of mistakes and I will have some problems to speak everything that I think it would be interesting. I would like to stress that this subject, trauma in archives, is still in its infancy within the field of archives. But recently we had an international survey sponsored by the International Council on Archives, and the outcomes presented under the title Understanding the International Landscape of Trauma and Archives report can be accessed on the ICA website. Probably my role as chair of the section of Archives and Human Rights played a part in my invitation. While records related to major human rights violations like arbitrary arrests, torture, murders, or disappearance merit close attention, it's imperative to acknowledge that trauma can extend to various types of events and thus to several records. I decided to present here 3 documents very important for all archivists: the Universal Declaration on Archives, the Code of Ethics, and the Principles of Access to Archives. None specifically address the issue of trauma, although they express points that must be assumed in situations when dealing with it. The declaration, the Universal Declaration on Archives, states that open access to archives enriches our knowledge of human society, promotes democracy, protects citizens' rights, and enhances the quality of life. The declaration states also that the records need to be available to everyone, respecting the pertinent laws and the rights of individuals, creators, owners, and users, since they must be used in a way to contribute to the promotion of a responsible citizenship. The Code of Ethics is an ethical framework for guidance of members of the profession, and not to provide, it doesn't aim to provide specific solutions to particular problems. The code centers on the role of archivists in the preservation and use of records, and regarding access, emphasizes that they be available for use. Item 6 affirms that archivists should promote the widest possible access to archival material and provide an impartial service to all users. Archivists should answer courteously and with the spirit of helpfulness all reasonable inquiries about their holdings and encourage the use of them to the greatest extent possible, consistent with the institutional policies, the preservation of holdings, legal considerations, individual rights, and donor agreements. They should explain pertinent restrictions to potential users and apply them equitably. It's worth mentioning the reference to courtesy and the spirit of solicitude that must mark their response, and to fairness that must govern the application of any restriction. Item 7 recalls the need to respect access by all and the privacy of the individuals who created or were the object of the record, as well as legal restrictions. And item 8 states that trust in archivists is based on general interest. A careful reading of the code indicates that although it's not explicit, general ethics, mandatory for all human beings, is the basis of a responsible professional conduct. This general ethics determines, as we all know, respect for others, their feelings and emotions, empathy in interpersonal relationships, the desire to help, and fairness in interpersonal treatment. And these values appear when the code emphasizes the need to give wide access to preserved material and courtesy and helpfulness in responding to requests in an effort to provide equitable service. It also raises the issue of privacy, as traumatized people often do not want records linked to these traumas to be accessible to others. The main objective of principles of access is to maximize access to archives. Principle 3 states that institutions holding archives adopt a proactive approach to access. Principle 4 states that institutions holding archives ensure that restrictions on access are clear and of stated duration, are based on relevant legislation, acknowledge the right of privacy, and respect the rights of owners of private materials. The right to privacy is of particular relevance, but the necessary restrictions must be clear and have their duration stated. Principle 5 states that archives are made available on equal and fair terms, and exceptions must be kept to a minimum. Principle 6 states that institutions holding archives ensure that victims of serious crimes under international law have access to archives that provide evidence needed to assert their human rights and to document violations of them, even if those archives are closer to the general public. This is essential not only in order that people can learn more about what happened to them, but also that they can fight for justice and reparation. People related to such records have the right to add statements to them in order to express their points of view and considerations about the events, and such statements must be available to all. This works as a right of reply to records that tend to be considered true because they have been preserved and they are in our archives. Principle 8 emphasizes that institutions responsible for archives ensure that operational limitations do not obstruct access to archives. Archivists are tasked with assisting individuals who are disabled, illiterate, or facing disadvantages, and would otherwise encounter substantial challenges in utilizing archives, ensuring their effective utilization. While specific instances necessitating special assistance are cited, the underlying essence extends beyond mere professional duty. It encompasses an ethical responsibility to offer support, catering to the unique needs of others. In conclusion, while these ethical documents do not explicitly address trauma-related records, they establish principles and guidelines that guide professionals in addressing sensitive topics while respecting individuals' rights and emotions. Archives exist to serve people, necessitating careful consideration of ethical principles in their management and accessibility. Thanks to all.
Thank you very much, Vitor. As we keep going here tonight, I'm going to move us along to Kirsten Wright, who's the program manager of Find and Connect web resource. Kirsten is joining us. I believe it is, it is already Thursday morning, and very early Thursday morning for you, from the University of Melbourne, Australia. I also just want to make a quick note, not so much to the speakers. Sometimes I know that when the speakers hear this, they're urged to move ahead quickly. I want to make a note to all of us in the audience. We are about 15 minutes behind our runtime, so grab that extra beverage or another cup of coffee, and just know that we're going to be running a few minutes behind, but that's okay. We want to give everybody a chance to present on their important work. Kirsten is going to be talking about trauma-informed archival practices. And considering that you are halfway across the world, I think it's time to turn it over to you and tell us what's in the news for tomorrow.
Yes, hello everyone. Yes, I'm coming to you from the future. Thank you so much for having me. It's actually not too early. It's almost 10 a.m. here, so it wasn't, at least it's not like 6 a.m. I do have some slides, so I am going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. Yes, it looks like you can. Brilliant. So yeah, my name's Kirsten Wright, and I'm coming to you today from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nations, who are the traditional custodians of the lands and waters around Naarm, Melbourne, Australia, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. As I said, my name is Kirsten. My pronouns are she, her. I have British and American ancestry, and I've grown up in Australia. And I am the program manager for the Find and Connect web resource, and I've worked in records management, archives, and freedom of information across both government and universities. With my colleague, Nicola Laurent, archives and trauma-informed archival practice has been a focus of ours in the last few years. And we actually were the people who did the survey that Vitor mentioned around archives and trauma and getting an international understanding. And I am going to put the link in the chat to that report that Vitor mentioned that's available on the ICA website, which is a preliminary report based on the survey findings. So as I mentioned, I'm the program manager for the Find and Connect web resource based at the University of Melbourne and funded by the Australian Government Department of Social Services. Find and Connect provides information about out-of-home care and child welfare in Australia. It links together the histories of information of those institutions who provided care, so places such as orphanages and children's homes, with information about who ran them and key events and legislation impacting on the history of out-of-home care. And we also have a focus on the records of child welfare. People who grew up in institutions such as orphanages are reliant on those institutional records to find out information about their childhoods. And these records are held by a vast array of organisations, including cultural institutions, past providers of care, and of course, state and national archives. And Find and Connect acts as a giant finding aid or catalogue to those records, describing what they are, who holds them, and how to get access to them. So to be clear, we're not an archive in that sense. We don't hold the records ourselves. Instead, we describe what does exist and how to access that. But Find and Connect is a broader program than just the web resource, with the Australian government also funding support services in each state. Many people had hugely traumatic experiences growing up in care, as is now much better understood both in Australia and internationally. And because of these traumatic experiences, the Find and Connect support services are required to use a framework of trauma-informed practice. And it was through working with them that we learned about trauma-informed practice and saw how useful this would be for archives. So what is trauma-informed practice? Recognising that trauma is pervasive, affects us all, and can lead to lifelong and serious effects. Trauma-informed practice is a strengths-based approach that can be put into practice in any context. And it works to reduce the likelihood of stressful interactions and the effects of any previous trauma on people. Trauma-informed practice is not about changing what services an organisation provides, but how those services are provided. So this means it will look different in every organisation, as it should be tailored to the needs of those communities, both users, people coming in, researchers coming into archives, and then also the staff and volunteers in archives. So trauma-informed practice is based on the 5 principles of safety, trust and transparency, choice, collaboration, and empowerment. And they all work together to create a safe and affirming environment for everyone, and can also be used to assess any part of an organisation's work to determine where improvements need to be made. And these principles work on both an organisational and individual level. So for example, in an archive setting, you might be working one-on-one with someone, say in a reading room, and the principle of choice would mean that that experience should be tailored to that person as much as possible. So it's driven by their choices, as they're the experts about what's best for them. And on an organisational level, the principle of choice might mean expanding how communities documented in the records and archives holds can work with that organisation, rather than this engagement process and the work priorities being only determined by the organisation. I don't have any more time to go into sort of how the principles could work, but you can basically take any or all of them to assess the work that you do, to see where improvements can be made, and I'm sure you can see how they all work together as well. And through application of all the trauma-informed principles, people and communities can feel empowered and affirmed, leading to more positive interactions and more healing. Yep. So in archives, traumatic materials can refer to information in records, and sometimes this is the context in which they're presented. So for example, if a record or item is stolen, or someone is viewing material about a specific Indigenous cultural practice that is inappropriate for them to view, this context can lead to trauma. And of course, the records themselves can be hugely traumatic. Records may contain dehumanising, degrading, or inaccurate language. They may document human rights abuses, surveillance of citizens, or destructive government policies. So we believe that implementing the principles of trauma-informed practice can, over time, create a more trusted environment to ensure that people get access to relevant records in a safe and empowering way. Utilising the principles of trauma-informed practice can also help implement many of the social justice and liberatory ideas discussed in the archives literature, such as those around radical empathy, participatory co-design, providing access in an empathetic and community-focused way, and practically considering how to centre people, not records, in archives work. So just to finish, I have done most of this work with my colleague Nicola Laurent, and we have been able to develop resources through the Australian Society of Archivists, who saw it was part of their role to support their members in this area. So we first developed an online course, and now we also run workshops on implementing trauma-informed practice. And Nicola and I, along with Michaela Hart, are also the co-founders of the Trauma-Informed Archives Community of Practice. This is an international peer support group which meets quarterly. There's a Discord server that acts as a central point for resources and information, and then the meetings happen on Zoom and are usually themed. In a great coincidence of timing, the next meeting of the Trauma-Informed Practice Community of Practice is actually happening Well, it's tonight for me, so I think it will be tomorrow morning for most of you. And this one, we've got some recent graduates of archives programs talking about their research and work into various aspects of trauma and archives. So if you're interested in coming along to that, take a look at the website. It'll pop you over to the Discord server, and then there's details of the meeting in there. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say. There's myself and Nicola's contact details if you do want to get in touch. And yeah, very happy to discuss further and take questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kirsten, and appreciate your work here. We're going to move ahead, and I am going to be very honest. My French is not good here. So, Loa, I am not going to try to really tear apart your name here. And so I apologize. Before I do it, I'm going to let you do the best introduction, because I can guarantee your French will roll off your tongue better than it will roll off mine. Loa will be joining us working as a chaplain in the Ontario Provincial Correctional field. You're talking about empathy from the prison floor. You hold a doctorate as well as an RP in addictions and mental health from a certification. And I'm going to let you just take the floor for the next few minutes before we do our Q&A.
Well, thank you very much. My name is actually Lois. So.
Oh my gosh, even worse for me. I didn't even get that right. So.
As in Joyce, but with an L.
All right. Well,
I keep saying.
I thought the French is the Loa term, but nope. I'm just gonna forgive myself. So
no,
sorry about that.
It's absolutely fine. Thank you so much, and good evening and good morning to everyone, wherever you are today. I just have 4 brief points, actually, which I hope will describe the idea of empathy from the prison floor. Because we talk about trauma, but the context I work in is arrayed, we might even say soaked in trauma past, trauma present, re-trauma, and the difficulties that embodies in how we respond to the constant lockdowns and so on and so forth. It has radical impact on the inmates and on the officers and on all the program workers. So yeah, it's a very crucial discussion that I'm so privileged to be part of today, although I'll be basically just talking a little bit about the sector, as it were. But I'll speak today in my personal capacity, not as a representative of the ministry. I just want to actually set out just some brief introductory ideas of how one might.
Right, can everybody see that slide?
Can you all hear me?
Yep. Okay, good.
Right. So I really
over the next 45 minutes, we will cover the topic exploring moral injury among.
Somebody is unmuted. The SH Archer.
Dr. Kirby Wyckoff.
That's all right.
There we go. Okay, go ahead. Back to you, Lois. Sorry.
No, it's no problem at all. Just what I was about to say is that the question really is, how do we engender a transformative view of the human, actually? Because in a sense, the inmates in our community and in the correctional context as a whole, we might say that they are those in society who have fallen through the cracks. In some ways, that's not true. I mean, they're there perhaps because of systemic issues, which is really implicit in a lot of what we've discussed today, such as poverty, mental health, addiction, and then, of course, many other issues, sociologically, personally, and so on and so forth. So it might be helpful to look at these 4 points. One might call them strategies that might help the inmates themselves to self-intervene out of pro-criminal action into more positive life patterns. And this may be instructive to our society and its multiple disciplines. The 4 points that I wanted to bring up, essentially the first one would be something let's call these 4 ideas a message of hope, a message of belief, a message of healing, and a message of winning love. Can we speak in terms of these 4 values in a context such as ours? Well, it would depend on how one views the human. For example, a message of hope. What do we mean by a message of hope? Well, we've embarked on several interventions, and one of them is to encourage everyone to see both the beauty and the brokenness in themselves. One might describe that as being an understanding of the fact that we all face both beauty and brokenness. And if we could accept that, we might say, perhaps following Marshall Linehan, come to a radical acceptance of ourselves instead of trying to, sort of dumb down some aspect of ourselves for the sake of some other aspects. What we end up doing is we end up trying to understand less of ourselves. So that would be a way to rekindle hope in someone who has been told all their lives, you are good for nothing, you will amount to nothing. And that's kind of what we would see as hope. The second thing would be a message of belief. What would we call a message of belief? Here, I think it's important not to try to fix anybody. And I think this is very crucial in our context. Again, with inmates who come to us with a very negative view of themselves. We begin with a message, you're not broken. You don't need fixing. We are just going to journey alongside you. I'm borrowing here some research from Kamiya himself, who did a lot of research in this area, where we want to just faithfully companion you who are not broken. You can figure yourself out. Our message to you is, you are worthy. You can begin by believing in yourself, irrespective of your past, and so on and so forth. By the way, I'm grossly conflating a lot of these discussions, which are quite profound if we had time, but for the sake of brevity, I'm just laying them out, presenting them to you. Hopefully at some point we could, if anybody wishes to, we could engage a deeper discussion. The third message would be a message of healing. What do we mean by healing? Well, here I would be borrowing a lot of work from, say, Breer and Scott and others. I would talk about the power of describing, the power of emoting. We know the research is quite solid on this, that when we develop a coherence in our story, including our spiritual story, trauma actually disintegrates in the implicit memory. So there's a healing that occurs as we scribe, describe, and emote. And there are ways to titrate emotions so that they don't become disenfranchised and they don't create more problems in PTSD and various other things. But face-to-face is important in this journey. So we are together, we are journeying alongside, accompanying and encouraging each one to find their sense of self-worth and to re-believe in themselves and to find healing through it. Lastly, would be a message of winning love. What do we mean by winning love? Well, here I think this is something which has become quite a signature of our work. It is an expansion of the biopsychosocial model into a biopsychosocial spiritual model. We're drawing a distinction between the facets of the spirit in the person and the facets of psychology. Everyone, our message is basically, it's pretty hard to hear when you've been told that you're good for nothing, to believe that you have a spirit that is God-breathed, and that spirit is expressed in different facets to the psychology. The psychology focuses on feelings, emotions, and intellect, whereas the spirit focuses on meaning and hope. There's an irreducible quest and search for meaning in every human. So if we were to take these 4 points in their totality, we found that using them has been incredibly helpful to us in our work in helping inmates rediscover positive life patterns, rediscover themselves, and rediscover the beauty in themselves, and start to engage some deep inventory, some positive actions, as opposed to living off the past trauma that they've experienced. Thank you for listening. I hope I've made these points clear, but I look forward to the ongoing discussions that may evolve. Thank you.
Great. Great, and thank you, Lois. And again, my apologies for completely butchering your name, even when I was trying my best. So,
No problem. No problem.
we have had 6 speakers. We have been on a journey for about an hour already. And you may have some questions. I dropped over here into the chat window a request for you to write out those questions if you have some out here, but also can take those questions if you use the hand gesture. So again, we've been doing Zoom for a while, but again, if you ever forget or just can't think about it, at the bottom of your screen, there's a reaction tab. And if you pull up that reaction tab and raise your hand, I'm gonna see who's gonna have questions. If we don't have questions, that's perfectly fine. If you just want to reach out to our speakers directly, you can always use the chat window and reach out to them directly. I'm certain they would love to talk with you offline and beyond this, connect with you over email. But if there are any questions, raise your hand, drop them into the chat window. Now is the time. And we'll do this for a few minutes if there are any. All right, I'm not hearing any, but I do have a background in fundraising, and we do have a rule in fundraising that says that after you make the ask, you get real quiet because the first person who talks loses. So I guess I will take that streak of breaking that. This does help us move forward, but again, don't hesitate to ask questions. If you have something, I guarantee you all of our speakers, maybe they can drop their contact information back into the chat window for us all, as well as, again, don't hesitate to reach out to them to drop them a private chat. Again, everybody has a lot of skills and experience in this. Thanks, Danielle. Everybody else should feel free to drop that in. Janeen, there we go. Information over here for everyone. But since there are no direct questions right now, or maybe no culminating questions that sort of fit us that I'm hearing, I want us to move ahead to our workshop portion. And this is the last portion. We're talking about cultivating a healing presence through trauma and mindfulness as vital elements of self-care. And despite the fact that I am, yes, the MC for this event, I don't know who our speakers are for this event. And so if they are here, they should speak up on their own behalf.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good evening and good morning. My name is Sev. I'm one of the speakers for this workshop. And okay, so brief information about me. I am very, very newly a therapist from Toronto, Ontario. I am about to complete my practicum in a clinic where we are working with usually a client who has experienced motor vehicle accident traumas. So we're trying to support them. And also I'm about to finish my master program. So I'm actually honored to be here with all of you today because I see that you all are very expert in your field. So what we are going to talk about today will be just the kind of reminder maybe not for yourself, but maybe for your clients, or sometimes actually for ourselves also. Even we are therapists or like expert in our fields, we need some remembrance to take care of ourselves. So let me just start with our first page. Yeah, okay. So I also have a colleague who's going to take over me after a couple slides after to talk about the mindfulness. So I'll be today actually we'll be discussing about trauma in general and self-care, and more specifically the role of mindfulness as a way of self-care during trauma healing process. It will be a kind of like general information, but yeah. So our agenda today will be, again, shortly will be what is trauma and how it impacts our lives. And it is 5 stages. And also from there, we'll be talking about a little bit about self-care, why it is important in our lives. And I also want to mention its 6 dimensions. And then from there, more specifically, we will discuss how mindfulness is one of the effective self-care ways to deal with the impacts of trauma. And if we will have time, we would like to also practice 2 mindfulness exercises with you all. If you don't have time, that is okay. So from there, I would like to start with what is trauma. So trauma refers to an emotional, psychological, and physical response to an event or series of events that are distressing, disturbing, or harmful. It's not only the event. Sometimes what we see or what we hear can be also a trauma. And from there, I also would like to touch upon the effects of trauma. Sorry, I mean, she's helping me to go through with the slides, so I'm not in charge, so it can be some gaps in between. Yeah, when we talk about the impacts of trauma on individuals' life, there are 4 important sections, and first one is the emotional impact, where we usually experience anxiety, depression, anger, guilt, and shame. And there is also a physical impact of trauma that we experience, which can be sleep disturbance, fatigue, pain, and headache, and so on. And it has also some cognitive impacts like flashbacks, memory problems, concentration issues. And another one will be social impact, usually like isolation, relationship challenges, or like withdrawing ourselves from our social environment. And from there, I would like to briefly touch upon the 5 stages of trauma. The first one is denial. The first stage of trauma is called denial, and it's like a traumatic event can change our outlook on the world, right? And it can even be like remove most of the people from life, and it can be overwhelming. And trauma can therefore be a result of us not accepting the situation. So it's like, this is the first stage of the trauma usually, but it can obviously change person to person. So it allows you to reduce the initial blow of what you have experienced and give us more time to come to the terms with what has happened to you. So the first stage is usually not accepting the situation or like questioning why that is happening to us. And while denial is a protective measure, this first stage won't last forever, and eventually you will have to face with the reality of the traumatic events and emotions and reactions tied to it. Second stage will be an anger. Once you have moved to the past, once we pass the first stage of the trauma, the realities of our terrifying experience can start to hit more. and it can lead us to feel more angry and start questioning more and ask the questions like, why did it happen to me? Or if it is going to end. And sometimes it brings like more emotions with it. Like, and also interestingly, anger stage is also a coping mechanism, just in slightly different than denial. Anger allows us to overwhelm our feelings of sadness, grief, and pain, and helping us to mask its full effect. And the third stage will be bargaining. After working through the stages of denial and anger, the real emotions tied to our traumatic experience become more clear. And these feelings can be more intense and overwhelming. It allows us to see the real scale of what we have lost or what has happened to us. And it can be easily get lost. I mean, we can be easily actually get lost in this bargaining stage as a way of postponing the reality of what it happened. And many people usually, especially those who comes from religious background, can lean heavily on the religion or the power above them to feel more relief. And the first and fourth stage will be usually depression. The anger and bargaining stage can be quite lively, and while depression moves us into a quieter and slower stage of trauma. And this stage comes nearly at the end of the trauma process, after we have moved through the previous coping stages like denial, anger, and bargaining. Once we experience all those stage and emotions and overwhelming, at the end we realize what we have experienced, even though we don't want to accept. We see the reality, and which cause us to feel some kind of emotions and put us in a stage of depression. And it can be different. I mean, the length can be different to person. Some can maybe feel depressed for a couple of weeks, but for some other people, it can be a very long time. And it can also cause symptoms like trouble sleeping, lack of energy, loss of interest, anxiety, restlessness, feeling of guilt, blame, worthlessness, and etc. And the last stage will be acceptance. The final stage of trauma is a positive move towards healing, which is acceptance. And arrival to this stage of trauma means we have reached to a place where our trauma reactions have proceeded, and we have acknowledged what happened to us, and we want to be in a better place. And we want to heal with those emotions and what we have experienced and consequences that we were experiencing. And while reaching to this stage, it's a positive step, and it does not always feel good to be in this final stage of trauma. Acceptance of our trauma can bring moments of sadness, again, grief and anger, but by reaching this point, these emotions are likely to be more manageable and put us in a better position to deal with the experience that we had. And to help ourselves through this stage, it is important to reach out for help when we need. It can be from our friends, it can be from family or any mental health professionals. And we also should be very proud of work that we have done to reach this stage of trauma, which actually lead us to be in the start to the healing process. So from here, I would like to touch upon the self-care, which is one of the effective part of healing process. So what is self? In order for us to understand the importance of self-care in our lives, I thought we first need to maybe be aware of the concept of self and self-care. So in psychology, as most of us know, the notion of self refers to a person's experience as a single, unitary, autonomous being that, separate from others, experience with continuity through time and place. The experience of self includes consciousness of one's physicality as well as one's inner character and emotional life. So when we think about self-care, it means to have a unique experience which differ from every other person's personal care. So what is self-care? Self-care is, we can go to previous slide actually. Self-care defined as individuals showing sufficient interest in his own physical and psychological health and activities they perform in this purpose. There are many definitions of self-care. One of them is also the practice of taking action to present or improve one's own health and well-being and happiness. Another one is just like inner therapy by Australian Institute of Professional Counseling. So I really like this definition. It's very short and sweet and very understandable by everyone. Inner therapy, it's totally how we take care of ourselves. So this definition actually highlights what we believe to be a center aim of self-care. The first aim is to limit the negative outcomes, in other words, cope with and reduce stress and related consequences. And the second aim is to promote broad positive outcomes, specifically to maintain and enhance well-being and overall functioning. It's also always important to know that effective self-care is highly personalized and based exclusively on individuals' needs. From there, I briefly would like to touch upon what is not self-care, because there are so many misunderstandings in the world. When we talk about self-care, people usually say, oh, it's very selfish, it's just only caring about yourself, not others, but it is not like that. So self-care is just a need, it's not selfishness, and self-care is not one-time practice, it's actually a lifelong process. So that's why it's very important for us how we integrate the self-care in our lives. So, and it is a practice that we should be done without a problem, not after we experience a problem. And it is not a single practice, it is actually multifaceted and comprehensive set of practices, and it takes time. Why self-care is important in our lives? I would like to touch upon the importance of self-care in general, and also the importance in the healing process of trauma. Why self-care is important in general in our lives is because it provides us physical health, mental health, and it helps us to be productive, and also help us to have better relationship with others around us. It contributes a healthy relationship and effective communications. More importantly, self-care in trauma healing can lead intense and overwhelming emotions, trauma, and engaging in self-care at that point, such as mindfulness, deep breathing, relaxation techniques can help to regulate our emotions and reduce the emotional stress that we're experiencing. And it also reclaiming the control. Trauma can make individuals feel helpless and feel out of control. Engaging in self-care empowers them to make choices for their well-being and fostering a sense of control and agency. And it also helps us to build resilience. Trauma is a gradual process, and regular self-care enhances resilience, helping individuals bounce back from the triggers and setbacks. And also, it promotes a sense of normalcy and helps integrate a traumatic experience into larger life narrative. And it also, lastly, actually provide us empowerment. Engaging in self-care after trauma can serve as a reminder that one's well-being is a priority. It's an affirmation that despite past experiences, they have the ability to care themselves and pursue fulfilling life. So in summary, actually, self-care is important because it contributes our overall health, enhances our ability to cope with the challenges, and empowers us to lead a balanced and meaningful life. From there, I would like to touch upon the 6 domains of self-care, which is physical self-care, psychological self-care, emotional self-care, relational self-care, and professional self-care. Physical self-care, as we all know, is taking care of our, first of all, our physical health, physical body, in order to achieve and support optimal functioning, to avoid breakdowns within the physical system. Example, like having adequate sleep, healthy nutrition, frequent exercise, engaging in maintaining healthcare activities to support our physical good. And the second domain is psychological health. Here, I specifically would like to actually touch upon, I mean, it's a broad term, and psychological self-care is usually like taking care of our mind and experience of self. It can be working on self-awareness, it can be working on self-reflection and receiving psychotherapy, psychological support, and also practicing mindfulness or self-compassion. Here, I actually would like to briefly touch upon self-reflection, which I think is a huge part of a psychological self-care. Self-compassion, as most of us know, is a concept that is attracting great interest in current psychology. It's a term given by Kristen Neff, and she says self-compassion entails self-kindness, mindfulness, and feeling of common humanity. Self-kindness refers to actually like being as nice as how we approached our friends, like being the same, having the same approach to ourselves in those difficult situations that we experience. And from there, I would like to touch upon the emotional self-care, which is it is usually even more challenging when we are experiencing trauma, because trauma is very related to emotional down, and which is one of the hard part of self-care. So for the purpose of differentiating domains of self-care, we define emotional self-care as practices that are engaged into safeguard against or address negative emotions or experiences, that, as well as those intended to create or enhance positive emotional experience and well-being. So another one is relational self-care, which is social relationship that we have from our environment and virtual social network that we try to connect with the world to heal with our trauma and build our bonds with others, which is very helpful in the healing process. And another one is professional self-care. Professional self-care is usually because we are human beings and we all have jobs, and even though we experience traumatic events, we still need to go to work or earn or do something to continue with our lives, right? So in that situation, to take care of ourselves, it's very important to take some breaks and also maybe like we try to reduce our work-related stresses or take ourselves from the environment where we feel more stressed. And if we cannot, just taking some breaks in between can be helpful. And then lastly, I would like to touch upon the spiritual self-care, which is usually spiritual practices and non-religious practices, for example, like giving thanks or praying. It can be practicing yoga, and as I said before, it can differ from person to person. And from the domains of self-care, lastly, what I would like to mention is how when we talk about the domains, people usually ask, okay, self-care is important, but how we can create our self-care routine. So for this, I will just point 4 important items here. First one will be setting a realistic and simple goals and identifying activities that are best fit with our lifestyle. For example, maybe we can say for our physical self-care, exercising is really good, but this is what we experience in our clinic actually, because most of our clients are, who have injuries from motor vehicle accidents, so they cannot actually take care of themselves physically. So their routine can be different from others, and they maybe need to more focus on their psychological well-being or their maybe spiritual self-care. So that's why it changes. It's very important to actually figure out what is best for our lifestyle. And the third one will be creating a little time. When we say self-care, even for us as therapists, sometimes, even though we're talking about this and how important is it, but we can even sometimes cannot find or say that we don't have time to do it. But actually, everyone can create some time during the day to practice, even maybe not in the day, every day, but some days in a week, right? So just being really cautious about it and actually wanting to do it is important. And lastly, not giving up on our daily routines. Daily routines are what keeps the healing process better, and then which also helps people to heal faster. So that's why not giving up on our daily routines are important, and also adding some extra things on top of it can be really helpful. From there, I would pass slides to Asli, who's going to talk about how mindfulness as one of the self-care routine and how it is important in healing trauma. So yeah, take it over, Asli.
Thanks so much, Sevde. Hi everyone, I'm really honored being there. I'm Asli. I would like to talk in more detail about mindfulness, which is one of the self-care practices.
I'm sorry, I will stop her here and just would like to briefly mention about her as well. She's my colleague and we are working in the same clinic. She's also a newly therapist and we are from the same school and from Toronto, Ontario.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Because mindfulness is very important, because of we should use some methods of minimize the effects of trauma on the human body and person's mental health. One of the easiest and most effective methods is mindfulness. Mindfulness is born in centuries of Buddhist practice and philosophy. In the late 13th century, these practices were incorporated into Western intervention to treat physical and mental illnesses. Kabat-Zinn first introduced mindfulness meditative practices to treat chronic pain and developed a program named Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. And Segal and colleagues extended the use of mindfulness meditation into physiatry by developing a treatment program for the prevention of depression relapse that combined cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness techniques and was named mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, for example. There are lots of definition of mindfulness. First one is mindfulness involves purposeful and non-judgmental attention to the present moment and self-regulation of thoughts, feelings, sensations, sights, and sounds in the here and now. Mindfulness is an attitude of openness, acceptance, and curiosity in both internal and external experiences. Paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. Another definition of mindfulness, a moment-to-moment awareness of one's experience without judgment. There are some activities of mindfulness. For example, breath awareness, body scan, and mindfulness observation is meditation. All breath exercise is all activities have some elements. It's very important because of mindfulness have some elements have been defined by Dr. Kabat-Zinn. Paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And also there are some components of mindfulness. First one is intention, is we can choosing to cultivate your awareness. And another one, attention to the present moment, sensation and thoughts will be. And attitude, being kind, curious, and non-judgmental. Yeah, it's mindfulness provides a safe space to explore traumatic memories and emotions without becoming overwhelmed gently. By observing these experiences non-judgmentally, individuals can gradually process and release the emotional charge associated with trauma. And trauma survivors often struggle with regulating intense emotions. Mindfulness helps develop emotional awareness, allowing individuals to respond rather than react to triggers. And mindfulness techniques such as breath awareness serve as grounding tools during this stress, helping individuals stay rooted in the present moment. Mindfulness practices can decrease the frequency and intensity of intrusive memories and flashbacks and combat dissociation by fostering a sense of connection to reality. Trauma can make an individual feel powerless. Mindfulness empowers them to regain a sense of agency by choosing how to respond to their thoughts and sensations. Trauma survivors often blame themselves too, and mindfulness encourages self-compassion, offering a kinder perspective and reducing self-criticism. Engaging in mindfulness consistently exchanges emotional resilience, helping individuals navigate triggers and challenges with the greater ease. And there are lots of benefits of mindfulness in here, the slides. And we find some useful self-care tools in here because of lots of tools we can find on Google or any applications. If you want to, you can use this one. And we want to make some exercise with you if you want. There are two exercises, but we are not sure the time is enough for.
Do we have enough time for at least one?
We are pretty tight on time. Maybe we could do one real briefly
Sure.
if there's something to be done briefly here. So
Great. Okay, this is the one that we are going to do.
It's not so long. It's that mindfulness looking very important because of mindfulness. We can make our five sense. Just this one is, it's a contemplate together. Actually, this method is called mindfulness looking. It is a method can you see easily apply by choosing an object specifically when you go out in nature or home. Practicing slow gazing with everyday objects is very easy and easy way to improve your imaging skills. It encourages you to think beyond your everyday experiences by looking at real objects, real evidence of the world around you and the past, and thinking about them. Now, I ask you to take a moment to examine these beautiful flowers in detail. And we can look for a minute just, and then we talked about these flowers details. If you want, we can look to just a minute together, just looking. I want to remove the flower. What do you remember about the flower? How did it make you feel while looking at it? Is there anyone who wants to share with us your experiences, your feelings?
If I may, there was symmetry there,
Mm-hmm.
but they were all different. And with the dew drops, it looked very fresh and very vibrant with the blurred greenish background. My observation.
Thank you so much.
So when you look at it, the point is actually, does it helping you to take yourself from that moment, even for a minute, to just to focus on what you are doing at that moment? And is it helping you to take your mind off from the daily issues that you're experiencing? So this is what the point where we can actually apply this exercise in our daily life when we are really overwhelmed with not only trauma, but day-to-day difficulties. So even like, this is just a small example, but even this one can really be helpful when we try to apply in our daily lives, which also is, I mean, another part that can be very useful in the trauma healing process.
Can we say that it was a pleasant distraction?
Exactly.
Is there anyone who wants to share with us? Yes, please, Rebecca.
I'd like to thank you for using this example, because I have found when working with people, when working through things myself, the idea that there's so much going on, the last thing you want to do is stop and look at a flower. And it seems like the most counterproductive thing to do. And when you want to break down and when you want to scream and everything's going really badly, this is not what you want to do. But exercises like this are critically important, because what really helps with recovery from trauma is slowing down the mind. And so exercises like this are like, they're so incredibly helpful. So if anybody, just sometimes people don't do this stuff on a regular basis. I do this every single day now. I didn't used to, and it doesn't seem like it helps at first. So if anybody is like listening to this and you just wonder if it really works, it does, it really works. So thank you so much for using this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing your experience with us, really, Rebecca. So yeah, this is the end of our presentation, workshop. Thank you for listening.
Thank you both for your diligence and bringing us into this space and giving us some important things to think about. I believe we've had 9 folks that have been engaged in some way, shape, or form in terms of providing us with wisdom tonight. We should thank all of them in our own ways. We've lost a couple who've had to go, and we know that we're about 20 minutes behind on our schedule. I want to turn it over to the CEED's coordinator director, just to say any parting words before we go. Is there anything that is left on the table that we should share here?
Dr. Abdul Hamid, please.
Yeah, so my name is Abdul Hamid Hathiani, and very briefly, I missed to introduce the Center for Excellence on Empathy, Equity, and Diversity, SEED, at the very beginning because of some technical issues. The focus is on social justice and civic engagement to build a more empathetic and equitable society across all sectors in the community. And so our strategy is to advocate for a more equitable and diverse society through networking with like-minded bodies, just like how we have networked today. Excellent session to be more inclusive in community, within the community, in the training initiatives, and to coordinate and disseminate relevant information and resources, which we have done today so well, and also to conduct research and studies in the field. So SEED continues to organize webinars, share resources, and publish a newsletter every month. We will soon be launching a guide to empathy, equity, and diversity coming soon to you. And so please stay tuned. And in November, from November 13th to November 16th, we will have our second International Empathy, Equity, and Diversity Week, Awareness Week, with renowned speakers, panelists, and workshops, such as on forgiveness, walk a day in my shoes, moving forward together, etc., even, showcasing a movie as well, which will be organized during the week. So we encourage each one of you not only to join us during these events, but also to make an effort to organize in your communities or institutions such activities and such events during that week. I really would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Cody Nielsen, who has kept us guided throughout this session. Really interesting session with lots of wonderful information being shared, and to all our panelists and speakers tonight. So our thanks to each one of you for sharing your morning, either it was your morning or your afternoon or evening or night, as it is right now here in Toronto, Ontario. We hope to see you soon once again. Please keep up with the good work and keep up with the good work that we all are so much engaged in making this world a better place to live in. Thank you, and final words to Dr. Muhammad.
My final word is thank you, dear friends. Thank you for the support. Thank you for the patience. And thank you for the presence that you bring from every corner of the earth that we can imagine. My sincere thanks to all of you for this kind of an attachment to a program that is to educate people, that is to create an awareness that we are all one, we are all same. despite our racial differences, despite our differences in whatever we come from. But basically, we are all one, trying to live on this earth together. And this is the theme of this year, which is moving forward together. Instead of moving alone by myself, we have initiated this year's theme as moving forward together. Thank you very much. Bless you all, and please be safe. Please have your safe night or safe morning and safe day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Take care. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, Dr. Cody, Dr. Witter.
Goodbye, everybody. Have a good
Sir.
night.
Thank you, everyone.
Daniel, Abdul, Lois.
Yes.
No, I can pronounce your name too, Lois. Thank you for that. Thank you for that moment of ice breaking.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was lovely.
Thank you, Susan.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Two Susans. Thanks a lot, Daniel. Good night.